My ex-boyfriend framed me for neglect so he could have my little sister Amy all to himself. So I went nuclear. 14 years later, he's out of prison, and now he's begun his revenge campaign. Back when Amy was 11, she came to me one day and asked if I thought it would be a good idea for her to move in alone with my boyfriend. That question shocked me. According to her, he had told her that I wasn't doing a good job of making her life fun and that she could have a much better time if she lived with him instead. It sounded extremely odd, but at the time, I honestly thought he was just off his meds and maybe, in some twisted way, thought he was helping her find a more suitable environment. I called him right after to ask what was going on. He acted dismissive and defensive, saying I was twisting things and that it wasn't like that at all. But the strange thing is, I had never suggested anything bad or made accusations. He jumped to that implication on his own. That made it feel even more suspicious. Not long after, things escalated. At a friend's barbecue, he stood up out of nowhere and started loudly announcing to everyone how Amy always seemed unhappy. He said, "It's tough for a kid when she's stuck with someone who can barely manage to take care of herself." I was humiliated. My friends stared at me like I was a terrible guardian. I pulled him aside immediately and asked him what the hell he thought he was doing. He doubled down, told me right to my face that I was failing Amy, that she deserved someone better. That was it for me. Right then and there, with everyone watching from a distance, I told him we were over. That's when he snapped. He shifted from silent anger to loud outrage in seconds. "Fine! Abandon Amy when she needs someone stable the most!" he shouted at me. I thought things might settle down after that, but they only spiraled further. A week later, I dropped Amy off at soccer practice. Coincidentally, or so he claimed, he happened to be driving by right as she wandered off. He made a huge scene, shouting that if I'd been more attentive, Amy wouldn't have to rely on luck for someone to watch over her. It was as if he was setting up a public record of me being negligent. Soon after, Amy started having nightmares again. Losing our parents had already been devastating for her, but now she was breaking down even more frequently. Strangely, my ex always seemed to know when she had these episodes, even though they happened inside our home. Then, the court documents arrived. He'd hired a sleazy lawyer who looked like a predator himself and filed for guardianship, accusing me of emotional abuse and neglect. He claimed Amy crying at night was proof that I was hurting her. It didn't matter that she loved me, or that I cooked her favorite meals every night and did everything I could to make her feel safe. He just wanted her. Every night, Amy and I sat together preparing for what she might say in court. When the day finally came, I felt like I was walking into a setup. My ex sat across the room, watching my every move. He presented his evidence, pictures and text messages that made me look like an unfit guardian. His lawyer tore into me, and I could feel every eye in the room filled with judgment. Then it was Amy's turn to testify. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. At first, she looked scared, but then her voice grew stronger. "He's lying," she said firmly. The room went still. She continued. "He kept coming around, even when my sister said he shouldn't. He kept texting me, bringing me gifts, telling me it was our secret." I felt ice flood through my body. Across the room, my ex shifted in his seat, visibly unnerved. The judge leaned in, listening closely. Amy's voice wavered, but she pushed through. "He said one day I'd understand he was better for me than my sister. He told me things that made me feel weird and uncomfortable." Gasps filled the courtroom. My ex suddenly leapt to his feet, yelling, "She's confused! She's making this up!" But the judge slammed her gavel, silencing him. Amy wasn't finished. "I never felt unsafe with my sister," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I only felt scared when he was around. He told me not to tell anyone because my sister would be jealous. But my sister always protected me. She's the only person I trust." All eyes turned to my ex. His lawyer looked like he'd forgotten how to speak. The courtroom fell into heavy silence. My ex's face twisted in fury as he stared at Amy, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch from across the room. The judge cleared her throat and asked Amy if she had any evidence of these communications. Amy nodded, her small hands trembling as she told the judge that he had given her a special phone to message him on. My stomach dropped. A wave of nausea swept over me. I had no idea there was a secret phone, and realizing he had been communicating with her right under my nose made me feel sick to my core. The courtroom seemed to tilt slightly as the weight of that revelation hit me. I thought back to all the times I'd helped Amy clean her room, fold laundry, or organize her backpack, never once suspecting there could be something hidden. The sense of betrayal hit me like a punch to the chest, sharp, deep, and disorienting. "Where is this phone now?" the judge asked gently, her tone softening as she addressed Amy. "In my backpack," Amy whispered, her voice barely louder than a breath. "He told me never to show it to my sister." The judge instructed the bailiff to retrieve Amy's backpack from where it sat beside me. I sat frozen as the officer pulled out a small, inexpensive flip phone I had never seen before. Its plastic casing was bright blue. Seeing it, this undeniable physical piece of deception, made my hands tremble. I recognized the tiny unicorn stickers on the case. Amy had been obsessed with those recently. He had studied her likes, crafted his manipulation around them. The realization made me sick with rage. The judge had the phone submitted into evidence, and suddenly 2 police officers entered the courtroom, their presence underscoring the gravity of the moment. Their boots echoed against the polished marble floor, each step punctuating the unfolding tension. Their badges caught the light as they moved into position. Then the judge turned to my ex with a stare so cold it could have frozen fire. "In light of this testimony," she said, her voice like steel, "I am ordering a full investigation into these allegations of inappropriate contact with a minor." That was when my ex lost control. His entire facade cracked as he leapt to his feet, shouting that Amy was lying, that I had put her up to it. His lawyer reached out to steady him, trying to calm him, but it was no use. The officers stepped forward. One of them informed him he was being detained for questioning. His voice boomed off the high ceiling as he continued to yell, spit flying from his mouth. He knocked over a glass of water on the lawyer's desk, soaking important documents as he gestured wildly. The hatred in his eyes as they led him away made my skin crawl. His glare promised this wasn't over. The judge then scheduled a follow-up hearing for 2 weeks later, stating firmly that Amy's well-being was her top priority. The bang of her gavel finally shattered the tension in the room. Papers rustled, people stirred, and hushed conversations began around us. The court clerk's fingers flew over her keyboard, recording everything with rapid clicks. Outside the courtroom, Amy collapsed against me. Her small body was racked with sobs. I held her tightly, my own tears spilling over as the full weight of what she had endured sank in. Our friend Tessa, who had come to support us, wrapped her arms around both of us. Her familiar perfume offered a brief moment of comfort in the storm we were weathering. The hard wooden bench creaked beneath us as we huddled together. Amy's tears soaked through my blouse. Her hair smelled of the strawberry shampoo she loved, the same brand our mom used to wash her hair with. I could feel her heart pounding against my chest. In that moment, she felt smaller, more fragile than ever. "He said you'd be mad at me," Amy hiccuped between sobs. "He said you wouldn't believe me." The following days blurred into a routine of police interviews and meetings with a victim advocate named Marissa. Her calm, gentle approach helped Amy open up about just how deeply my ex had manipulated her. Dozens of messages were recovered from the secret phone, many of them unmistakably predatory, designed to groom her and turn her against me. We spent long hours in sterile interview rooms with stiff chairs and bland artwork hanging crooked on beige walls. The harsh glare of fluorescent lighting seemed to exaggerate the dark circles beneath Amy's eyes. Marissa always brought her a juice box and a small pack of crackers, tiny, thoughtful gestures that softened the cold, clinical atmosphere. The soft scratching of pens on legal pads and the quiet hum of recording devices became background noise as Amy slowly, bravely revealed more. The detective assigned to our case, Detective Powell, had kind eyes and a resolute expression. He assured me they were building a strong case. His ever-present coffee mug, always adorned with silly cartoon animals, was probably meant to make children feel more at ease. The leather edges of his notebook were worn smooth, a quiet testament to years spent collecting the stories of other victims he'd tried to help. Exactly 1 week after the court hearing, Detective Powell called with news that brought a sudden wave of relief. My ex had been formally arrested and charged with child endangerment and attempted grooming. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The crushing weight I'd been carrying around began to lift, even if only slightly. I was folding laundry when the call came in. Amy's tiny t-shirts and my work clothes scattered in neat piles around me. The familiar scent of fabric softener filled the living room. As I sank onto the couch, legs weak from the release of tension, Powell explained the charges. Outside the window, children played in the street, their laughter floating up toward us. A small, bright reminder of the normal life I wanted so desperately for Amy. But that peace didn't last. Just 3 weeks later, Detective Powell showed up at our front door, his face grim, posture unusually slouched. He looked like he hated every second of what he was about to say. "The charges have been dropped," he said, his voice low and heavy with frustration. My stomach turned to stone. My ex had hired a powerful attorney who argued that, although the messages were inappropriate, they hadn't explicitly broken any laws. The defense painted him as a misunderstood man, simply trying to provide emotional support to a grieving child after the death of her parents. Rain tapped against the windows as Powell explained. The gray, dreary sky outside felt like it was pressing down on the house. On the kitchen counter behind me sat half-prepared plates of spaghetti, Amy's favorite, now seeming more like a cruel reminder of the quiet evening we would no longer enjoy. Detective Powell shifted uncomfortably, his badge catching a sliver of light. "I couldn't believe it either," he admitted. "But his lawyer twisted everything, made it sound like he was just trying to help, and that you misunderstood his intentions. Without explicit threats or sexual language in the messages, the DA doesn't think we'd win the case." The restraining order remained in place, but that did little to calm my nerves. The thought that he was free, walking the same sidewalks, maybe even watching us, made my skin crawl. That night, I installed new locks and set up a security system. The drill vibrated in my hands as I worked, its high-pitched whirring cutting through the silence. Tiny metal shavings scattered across the floor, and the smell of fresh sawdust filled the air like a warning. I needed to do something, anything, to reclaim a sense of safety. Amy sat quietly on the stairs, her homework forgotten beside her. She chewed nervously on the end of her pencil, watching me work with wide, anxious eyes. The new deadbolts gleamed under the hallway light, their polished brass finish oddly cheerful against our worn, weather-beaten front door. A technician from the security company stood in the entryway, explaining the features in a flat, emotionless tone. Motion sensors, camera coverage, emergency response time, while I nodded along blankly, trying to absorb the details through the fog of my anxiety. But the feeling never left me. This wasn't over. He wasn't going to let go so easily. I was right. 2 days later, I saw his car parked down the street from our house. That familiar silver sedan, partially hidden by a neighbor's hedge, left faint tire marks in the soft dirt. My heart pounded. Later that same day, a message lit up on my phone, its words glowing ominously on the screen. Even the school, once a sanctuary, now felt exposed. Its cheerful murals and red brick walls, designed to make children feel safe, seemed laughably fragile. Every time I dropped Amy off, I found myself scanning the crowd of adults. My eyes constantly moved, studying each face, looking for a threat. A sudden text alert made me jump one morning, spilling coffee across the kitchen counter. The spreading stain was a bitter reminder of how quickly any sense of safety could be shattered. I showed the messages to Detective Powell. He read them carefully, but explained that it still wasn't enough to violate the restraining order. My ex had claimed his phone was stolen that day, and frustratingly, his alibi checked out. And then the stalking escalated. He became a shadow, always at the edge of our lives. Sometimes I would spot him in the reflection of a store window, just long enough for our eyes to meet before he slipped away. Other times he'd park across the street from our home, lingering just long enough to make sure we saw him before driving off. The message was clear. I'm watching you. The constant fear wore me down. I checked and rechecked the locks multiple times a night. I peeked through the blinds at every rustle or creak. I slept with my phone clutched tightly in my hand. The dark circles beneath my eyes grew deeper. My appetite vanished. Even the smallest tasks, grocery shopping, walking to the mailbox, turned into strategic exercises. I scanned every parking lot, looked behind every aisle, and never let Amy out of reach. The stress began to affect her too. Amy started having panic attacks whenever we stepped outside. The faintest hint of danger would send her into spiraling breaths and tears. That was the moment I realized we had to start documenting everything to build a case that couldn't be dismissed or twisted in court. I installed surveillance cameras around the property and began keeping a detailed log. Every sighting, every hang-up call, every time Amy thought she saw him, it all went into a notebook that quickly became a disturbing chronicle of our fear. The pages filled rapidly, my handwriting growing more cramped and desperate with each entry. We even created a set of hand signals, Amy's idea, to alert each other if she thought he was nearby. A secret language, born out of necessity. Detective Powell encouraged this, telling us that establishing a consistent pattern was our best shot at legal protection. His experience became our guide in the darkness. Then, about 2 months after that first court hearing, I was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. For a few seconds, I lay frozen, disoriented, and breathless. Every shadow in my bedroom suddenly seemed sinister. The familiar shapes of furniture turned into potential hiding spots for someone waiting in the dark. The red glow from the digital clock burned into my eyes. 2:17 a.m. Its numbers pulsing like a warning signal. Grabbing the baseball bat I now kept beside the bed, I bolted for Amy's room, heart pounding so hard I could barely hear. She was already sitting up in bed, her wide, terrified eyes glistening in the moonlight. Her unicorn-shaped nightlight cast a soft glow, just enough for me to see the fear on her face. "Someone's in the house," she whispered, voice trembling. The stuffed animals arranged in a circle around Amy's bed, her protective guardians, as she called them, suddenly looked pitiful and powerless in the face of real danger. I heard the soft creak of floorboards from downstairs, confirming our worst fear. Someone was in the house. With shaking hands, I dialed 911, my voice barely steady enough to relay our address. Then I moved quickly, guiding Amy into the closet and pushing a small dresser in front of the door as quietly as possible. We crouched together in the darkness, surrounded by hanging clothes and the faint scent of laundry detergent mixed with the sweet perfume Amy had received for her birthday. Each floorboard groan downstairs was like a hammer to my chest. I held Amy tightly, her trembling body pressed against mine. Her heart raced, and I could feel her breath hitch every time we heard a sound, drawers opening, objects being shifted, slow footsteps approaching. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, time slowing to a crawl. But eventually, the distant wail of sirens pierced the silence. Relief flooded me, though my body remained rigid with tension. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights lit up our walls in bursts as police officers secured the scene. They caught him trying to escape through the back window, my ex, his body halfway out when officers spotted him. A backpack dangled from one shoulder. Inside, they found duct tape, a coil of rope, and a knife. Items so ordinary in a hardware store, but chilling when their purpose was considered. Ice ran through me as the officer recited the contents. On the kitchen table, under the harsh overhead light, the backpack's contents were laid out. The silver duct tape gleamed. The rope had been neatly coiled. The knife was still sealed in its packaging, untouched, as if it had been bought specifically for this night. There was no way to spin this, no defense he could offer to explain it away. This time, there would be consequences. He was arrested on the spot, charges including breaking and entering, violating the restraining order, and possession of burglary tools. I sat on the hard courtroom bench days later, my hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my fingers had gone numb. His lawyer, clad in an expensive suit and armed with a smug demeanor, tried to minimize the charges, claiming he'd simply returned to retrieve personal items. But what personal belongings? I wanted to scream. Required rope, duct tape, and a knife? The judge didn't buy it. Her face was set in a firm line, skepticism radiating from her. She set bail high, but somehow his parents paid it. That moment infuriated me. Despite everything, his parents still supported him. His release came with an ankle monitor and stricter conditions for the restraining order, rules that were supposed to keep us safe. But somehow, they didn't feel like enough. I watched his parents from across the courtroom. His mother kept her eyes down, avoiding mine completely. But his father? He stared directly at me, cold, unflinching, with the same unsettling intensity I'd seen in his son's eyes. And in that moment, I couldn't help but wonder, just how far had the apple fallen from the tree? The ankle monitor looked strangely out of place against his polished, expensive shoes, a high-tech symbol of boundaries he clearly had no intention of respecting. The harassment didn't stop. It simply evolved, becoming more covert, tailored to skirt the edge of legality. Friends began reporting that they'd seen him watching our house from afar, just outside the range specified by the restraining order. He was following the rules technically, but the message was clear. I'm still here. Then Amy's teacher called me one afternoon, her voice tense. He had shown up at school, claiming I had sent him to pick up Amy. Fortunately, the school called to confirm first. After that, they immediately tightened security procedures, verifying IDs more thoroughly, updating pickup protocols. It was another daily reminder of how far from normal our lives had become. Other parents noticed. Their sideways glances followed us at every school event, their conversations quieting when we passed by. Amy's friends asked questions she couldn't answer, innocent curiosity, but enough to make her withdraw even further. Then the online harassment began. Someone started creating fake social media accounts to contact Amy. The messages never contained outright threats, but the intent was unmistakable. To scare her. They were always just vague enough to avoid legal repercussions, but filled with enough implication to keep her looking over her shoulder. Detective Powell was growing frustrated too. On one of his now frequent visits to check in, he sighed and said, "He's staying just within the law, barely, but keep documenting everything. He'll slip up eventually." And so we did. The wall where we kept our records grew crowded. Printouts of messages, grainy stills from our security cameras, timestamps and entries from our ever-growing incident log covered every inch. Multiple notebooks filled with handwritten accounts sat beneath it. A wall of fear, yes, but also a wall of resistance. A testament to our refusal to be ignored or forgotten by a system that too often looked away. That mistake we were waiting for finally came, 3 months later. Amy and I were grocery shopping. The harsh white of the overhead lights buzzed above us as we pushed our cart down the cereal aisle. Suddenly, Amy stopped cold. Her fingers clamped around my arm, tight enough to leave marks. "He's here," she whispered, her face as pale as snow, eyes locked on something behind me. The store's upbeat music felt grotesquely out of place. The ordinary shuffle of other shoppers continued around us, oblivious to the tension strangling us. Cold air drifted from the refrigerated cases nearby, raising goosebumps on my arms. Or maybe it was fear that did that? Our cart was filled with the mundane. Milk, bread, Amy's favorite cereal with the cartoon tiger on the box. All so normal. And yet, everything had shifted. I turned and saw him. My ex stood at the end of the aisle, watching us with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It wasn't a coincidence. He'd followed us. He knew we'd be here. I didn't wait. I grabbed Amy's hand and turned toward the exit, leaving our cart abandoned in the aisle. With my free hand, I pulled out my phone and dialed the police as we hurried toward the doors. Behind us, I heard footsteps. Slow at first, then faster. Closing in. The rain had started, soft at first, then quickly intensifying, drumming on the metal shopping carts and car roofs. The sound of our own rushed steps splashing through shallow puddles echoed in my ears. My jeans clung to my ankles as they soaked up the water from the pavement, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The parking lot lights cast hazy halos through the rain, bathing everything in an eerie silver glow as we ran for the car. Before I could even look back, I felt a sudden, forceful shove from behind. I stumbled forward, my phone and keys slipping from my hands and clattering against the wet pavement. Amy screamed. I spun around in time to see my ex grabbing her arm, his fingers digging cruelly into her skin. "Let her go!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet, adrenaline flooding my body. My knee was bleeding where I'd hit the rough ground, but the sting barely registered through my rising panic. Rain soaked through my clothes, my hair clinging to my face as I lunged toward them. Amy's yellow raincoat stood out like a beacon against the stormy backdrop, her face twisted in terror as she tried to pull away from his grip. A store security guard, alerted by the commotion, came sprinting toward us, radio in hand, eyes scanning the scene. My ex immediately released Amy, stepping back with his hands raised in mock surrender. His expression shifted into practiced innocence. "Just saying hello to my girls?" he said smoothly, wearing that same unsettling smile. "Nothing illegal about that." His shoes squeaked as he backed away on the slick pavement, water dripping from the hem of his expensive coat. The security guard paused, unsure, glancing between us as the rain hammered his uniform and badge. Other shoppers had stopped nearby, forming a loose circle of onlookers. Their concern was palpable, but this time they weren't just watching. This time, there were witnesses. Security cameras had caught everything, him trailing us through the store. The physical contact in the parking lot, the violation of the restraining order was undeniable. GPS data from his ankle monitor confirmed he'd gone to that store deliberately, at the exact time he knew we usually shopped. Footage showed him lurking behind displays, shifting his route to intercept us near the exit. Every move deliberate. The timestamp on the video synced perfectly with the ankle monitor logs, painting a crystal-clear picture of premeditated stalking. Grainy images from the exterior cameras even caught the confrontation in the parking lot. Amy's frightened face, his hand on her arm, my desperate rush to reach them. He was arrested again, this time for violating the restraining order, assault, and stalking. But it was what came next that finally shattered the illusion of doubt. During the investigation, officers reviewed nearby security footage from our neighborhood. What they found turned my stomach. He had been breaking into our home while we were away. The footage revealed him entering the house, going through Amy's belongings. But the worst part, the part that made me feel like the air had been sucked from my lungs, was the discovery of a tiny hidden camera in Amy's room. It had been disguised as a button sewn onto one of her stuffed animals. From its position, it had a full view of her bedroom. The violation was beyond comprehension. Our home, our safe place, her privacy, desecrated. I watched, numb, as technicians in white gloves removed the device and sealed it into an evidence bag. The horror we had lived through had finally become undeniable. He was charged with stalking, breaking and entering, violating a restraining order, fleeing to avoid prosecution, and attempted kidnapping. The judge denied bail immediately, her decision swift and unequivocal. At the police station, the evidence board laid out the story in stark, chilling detail. Photographs of the hidden camera, bus tickets, one forged with Amy's name. A map marked with highlighted routes leading toward the border. Detective Powell walked me through each piece of evidence, his expression grim as he explained just how close we had come to a scenario too horrifying to imagine. My knees gave out as the full weight of it hit me, and he quickly pulled over a chair for me to sit. At the trial, the evidence spoke louder than words, each piece layered on the last, building an irrefutable narrative of obsession, manipulation, and predatory intent. When my ex took the stand, against the advice of his own attorney, it was the beginning of the end. Ms. Daniels, the prosecutor, stood poised in her perfectly tailored suit. Her questions were sharp, precise, and devastating. She moved through the facts like a surgeon, cutting through every excuse he offered. The courtroom was packed. The high-profile nature of the case had drawn a crowd. Media, concerned citizens, victims' advocates. Every eye was on him, every ear tuned to Ms. Daniels as she held up the map and bus tickets. "Is it your testimony?" she asked, her voice measured and cold. "That someone who only wanted what was best for Amy would create a plan to take her to a remote location in another country?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then his calm shattered. "She belongs with me!" he snapped, his voice rising, eyes wild with fury. "Her sister is poisoning her mind!" The outburst echoed across the courtroom. His face twisted with rage, spit flying as he lost control. The court reporter's hands flew across her machine, recording every damning word. Jurors exchanged glances, some leaning back instinctively, as if repelled by the raw anger now boiling to the surface. His lawyer closed his eyes for a moment, the realization clear. The case was lost. The jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. Guilty, on every count. At sentencing, the judge didn't hold back. Her words rang through the courtroom like a gavel striking steel. "This court has rarely seen such a deliberate, sustained campaign of intimidation and harassment," she said, eyes locked on my ex. "You have shown utter disregard for the law, for judicial orders, and most importantly, for the safety and well-being of the child you claimed to care for." Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting bars of light across the floor as she delivered her judgment. The courtroom, usually creaking with the shifting weight of time, was still. The wood-paneled walls seemed to hold her words, absorbing their gravity. Not a single cough or rustle broke the silence. It was a moment of reckoning, and this time, justice did not blink. She sentenced him to 14 years in prison, with no possibility of early release. The metallic click of the handcuffs tightening around his wrists echoed through the courtroom, a fitting conclusion to the months of fear and chaos he had caused. His once immaculate suit was now wrinkled from days spent in court, and no amount of tailoring could hide the reality of his fate. The bailiff led him toward the door that marked the start of his life behind bars. I felt Amy slip her hand into mine. Her grip was firm, steady, not trembling anymore. Outside the courthouse, she wrapped her arms around my waist in a tight hug. "Is it really over?" she whispered, looking up at me with eyes far too old for her age. "Yes," I said, trying to sound more certain than I felt. The memory of his last hateful stare still lingered in my mind. "It's really over." The crisp autumn air felt cleaner somehow, as if we were finally allowed to breathe freely. The constant weight of fear began to lift just slightly. Leaves swirled across the courthouse steps, vibrant reds and golds against cold gray stone. A flock of pigeons scattered as we made our way down toward the parking lot, their wings flapping against the blue sky. Detective Powell approached us with a soft smile, the kind that carried real meaning. The lines at the corners of his eyes creased with warmth. "You both did good in there," he said gently, handing me a card. On the back, he had written his personal number. The gesture was simple, but deeply meaningful. "If you ever need anything, or if you get worried when he gets out, just call. Anytime." His badge caught the light as he shifted, a symbol that had come to represent safety and belief when the world felt hostile and disbelieving. I held the card in my hand, the weight of it strangely comforting, a connection to someone who had stood by us when few others had. We eventually moved to a new home in a different neighborhood, a fresh start that felt long overdue. The process of packing up and unpacking became oddly healing. With each box we opened, it felt like we were reclaiming control over our lives. Amy transferred to a new school where no one knew our story. Slowly, the rhythms of everyday life began to return. The ever-present fear began to ebb, like a tide receding, inch by inch. Our new kitchen had yellow curtains, just like our old one. A small thread of continuity that made the unfamiliar feel more like home. Amy's new room was bigger, with a cozy window seat where she could read, and a ceiling high enough for new glow-in-the-dark stars, this time arranged into detailed constellations. The creaks and sighs of the new house became familiar, no longer igniting panic at every sound. Amy's nightmares became fewer, though they never vanished completely. But she began to smile more. She made new friends. She joined a new soccer team and rediscovered her love for the game. Years later, Amy graduated from college with honors, a degree in psychology held proudly in her hands. Her experiences had shaped her, guided her. She told me she wanted to help other children who had endured trauma like she had, and I believed her. Because I had watched her survive the worst and become something stronger. Amy's dorm room walls had gradually become a collage of new memories, photos of friends, laughter-filled events, moments of growth. Slowly, the shadows of her painful past were outnumbered by the brighter light of her present. Her textbooks on child development and trauma recovery were often annotated with personal reflections, her own journey woven into her academic understanding. The stuffed rabbit from her childhood still had a place on her bed. Its worn fabric was no longer a relic of fear, but a symbol of strength. A quiet reminder that even when the world feels frightening, we can still find our way through. The restaurant around us buzzed with celebration. Other families marked their own milestones, unaware of the deeper weight behind ours. Amy's graduation cap rested on the table beside her, the tassel now flipped to the left, a simple gesture that marked a profound transition. The bubbles in our champagne glasses sparkled like rising stars, tiny bursts of light dissolving into joy. I looked around our table. Amy, my partner David, who had entered our lives 3 years after the trial, and our closest friends who had stood by us through every storm. And in that moment, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not because the danger had vanished forever, but because we had built a life strong enough to endure whatever came next. David's hand found mine beneath the table, grounding me with a quiet steadiness I once thought I'd never feel again. Tessa was there too, her laughter now a welcome regular soundtrack to our days, her loyalty unshaken through every dark chapter. The faces around the table reflected the community we had rebuilt, piece by piece, relationship by relationship, a mosaic of love, strength, and healing. My ex would eventually be released. That was a truth we could not ignore, a shadow on the horizon, distant but real. But we wouldn't face it alone, and we wouldn't face it with fear. We would face it with the strength we had earned, inch by inch, year by year. Detective Powell had kept his word. He checked in from time to time, letting us know of any changes in my ex's legal status. A steady thread of protection still woven into the fabric of our lives. Our home now had a state-of-the-art security system, but it wasn't the center of our world anymore. It was just one tool among many. Amy had learned self-defense, not driven by fear, but as a way to reclaim her autonomy, her confidence, her power. And as I raised my glass across the table to clink against Amy's, I felt it, that final release. The last piece of fear loosened its grip. He hadn't broken us. He had failed. What he tried to destroy had only grown stronger. Our bond, our love, our lives. In the warm glow of the restaurant, with Amy's radiant smile shining back at me, I knew the truth with absolute clarity. We were no longer victims. We were survivors, and no matter what the future held, that truth would never change.